You've been sitting in a waiting room for 11 minutes. You've already checked your phone 4 times. There's nothing new. You refresh anyway. Somewhere in the last 60 seconds, a small, itchy discomfort has started crawling up the back of your skull. You know this feeling. It's boredom, and modern humans treat it like an emergency. We built an entire attention economy, a trillion-dollar industry of infinite scroll and autoplay, specifically to make sure we never have to feel it for more than a few seconds at a time. Now take away the phone. Take away the television, the radio, the books, every form of manufactured entertainment that has ever existed. Put yourself in a hide shelter somewhere 80,000 years ago. The hunting is done. The fire is fed. The light is fading, and there is nothing left to do until morning. No agenda. No notifications. Just you, your own mind, and several hours of unstructured time stretching out in front of you like a held breath. What did you do? This is one of those questions that almost never comes up when people talk about ancient humans. We ask about the mammoths, the migrations, the wars. Nobody asks what happened during the empty hours, the long stretches of nothing between the moments of survival that actually make it into the documentaries. But ancient humans had a lot of empty hours. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Kung of the Kalahari, consistently find that once basic caloric needs are met, people in these societies often work fewer hours per week than a typical modern office employee. Foraging and hunting come in bursts, followed by long stretches of rest and idleness. Boredom was not a rare modern inconvenience. It was a recurring, guaranteed feature of the ancestral environment, and the human brain had to find something to do with it, because a brain with nothing to do is a brain that starts making bad decisions. Let's start with why boredom exists at all, because it's not a design flaw. Boredom is understood by psychologists as a genuine biological drive, in the same category as hunger or thirst. It's an alarm signal, evolved to push an organism out of unproductive repetition and toward novelty and exploration. A bored animal goes looking for something new. One that finds nothing new dies slightly more often than one that does, because it misses food sources, threats, and opportunities a more restless mind would have noticed. The itch you feel scrolling a phone for the 5th time in a minute is a survival mechanism, wildly miscalibrated for a world it was never built for. Ancient humans felt that exact same itch. They just didn't have a phone to misfire it into. What they had instead was raw, undirected time, and what they built out of it turns out to be some of the most important behavior in the human story. Start with the hands, because idle hands are where a huge amount of this story lives. Stone tool making, what archaeologists call knapping, required real skill, but also enormous repetition. You don't make one good hand axe. You make hundreds across a lifetime, most of them during downtime around camp, not during an active hunt. Researchers who study Acheulean hand axes, tools made in essentially the same teardrop shape for over 1 million years across 3 continents, have pointed out that many surviving examples are too finely worked, too symmetrical, too time-consuming to have been strictly necessary for function. Some archaeologists argue a portion of this knapping wasn't about producing a better edge at all. It was about the process itself, the rhythm of stone striking stone, the small satisfaction of watching a shapeless rock slowly become something with a form. That's not so different from what a modern brain gets from whittling or doodling during a boring meeting. Repetitive, skilled, low-stakes hand motion is one of the oldest known cures for an idle mind, and it left behind a fossil record. Speaking of doodling, this is where things get genuinely strange. In Blombo's cave on the coast of South Africa, archaeologists found a piece of ochre dating back roughly 73,000 years, deliberately engraved with a cross-hatched geometric pattern. It has no obvious practical use. It doesn't sharpen anything, doesn't hold anything, doesn't feed anyone. It is, as far as anyone can tell, a doodle, scratched by someone with a sharp point and a stretch of time on their hands. Similar engraved ochre and etched ostrich eggshell fragments have turned up at sites like Diepkloof, some pushing past 60,000 years old, and in caves in India, cupules, small round hollows pecked into rock, appear at sites some researchers date to hundreds of thousands of years old, long before anatomically modern humans existed. Nobody fully agrees on what these marks meant. Maybe some were symbolic, maybe some were counting systems, maybe some were nothing more than a person with an idle point of flint, making marks because making marks felt like something to do. The line between art, record-keeping, and pure fidgeting is blurrier than most people assume, and it may have always been blurry. Now let's talk about play, because ancient humans played constantly, and the evidence for it is honestly kind of delightful. Sheep and goat ankle bones, called astragali, are among the most common small objects found at prehistoric sites across Europe and Asia, and their shape means they naturally land on one of four sides when tossed, exactly the way a modern die does. Long before anyone had invented dice as we know them, people were almost certainly throwing knucklebones for games of chance, betting, or simple amusement, a habit so persistent that astragali were still being used for games and divination in ancient Greece and Rome thousands of years later. Board game-like objects show up early too. Carved stone slabs with rows of small holes, resembling an ancestor of the game Mancala, have been found at sites in Jordan dating back roughly 9,000 years, and some researchers argue the underlying counting and capturing logic behind these games could be far older than any surviving board. And then there's string. Cat's Cradle and other string figure games appear independently in nearly every documented culture on Earth, from the Arctic to the Amazon to the Pacific Islands, with no possible contact between most of them. When a behavior shows up everywhere, invented over and over by unconnected people with nothing but their own hands and a length of cord, that's usually a sign the behavior is very old and very close to something fundamental about how bored human minds like to occupy themselves. Music deserves its own mention because it might be one of the oldest boredom cures of all. The Hohlfels flute, carved from a griffon vulture's wing bone, was found in a German cave and dates back roughly 40,000 years, meticulously drilled with finger holes to produce a tuned scale. It is not a crude noisemaker. It's an instrument made by someone who understood pitch, spacing, and airflow well enough to tune it, presumably through a long process of trial, error, and idle experimentation nobody wrote down. Before instruments, there was almost certainly rhythm. Clapping, chanting, drumming on hollow logs or stretched hide, humming to fill silence. All of it costs nothing but time, and all of it produces something the brain rewards heavily. Music activates the same dopamine pathways as food and social bonding. A bored ancient human beating out a rhythm on a fallen tree wasn't just passing time. Their brain was giving them a reward for it, the exact same neurological handshake a modern person gets from a favorite song on repeat. Then there's talking, which might be the biggest one of all. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar has argued that human language itself may have evolved partly as a replacement for physical grooming, the hands-on, one-on-one bonding behavior still used by chimpanzees and other primates. Grooming only works on one individual at a time. Talking, gossiping, storytelling can maintain social bonds across an entire group simultaneously, which becomes a huge advantage once group sizes grow beyond what physical grooming can keep up with. A huge amount of that talking, especially during idle evening hours around a fire, was almost certainly stories. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Juhoansi and the Kalahari have found that daytime conversation tends to be practical and complaint-heavy, logistics, minor disputes, resource talk, while conversation after dark, once the fire is lit and the work is done, shifts overwhelmingly towards storytelling, myth, and shared history. These stories weren't just entertainment either, even though they clearly were entertaining. They encoded practical survival knowledge, which plants were poisonous, which animals were dangerous, which neighboring group could be trusted, wrapped inside a memorable narrative so it would stick and get passed down. Boredom, in other words, may have been one of the engines that built human culture itself, because a bored group sitting around a fire with nothing to do naturally starts telling each other stories, and a story that gets told enough times becomes myth, and myth becomes the glue that holds a society's knowledge together across generations who never had to relearn every lesson the hard way. Children get their own chapter in this story too. Archaeologists have found small, non-functional versions of adult tools, miniature spear points too fragile for real hunting, tiny pots too small to cook in, at sites around the world, and the leading interpretation is that these were toys, or at least practice objects, used by bored children copying the adults around them through play. Play in juvenile animals generally is understood as low-stakes practice for high-stakes adult skills, and human children playing at hunting, building, And cooking with miniature tools were very likely doing exactly that, turning empty time into rehearsal for the life they'd eventually need to live for real. So what did ancient humans do when they were bored all day? They napped stone past the point of necessity, worked their hands into a kind of meditative rhythm. They scratched patterns into ochre and eggshell for no functional reason anyone can find. They gambled with sheep bones and looped string into shapes between their fingers. They carved bone flutes and drummed on logs and hummed until the humming turned into song. They talked, and the talking turned into story, and the story turned into myth, and the myth turned into the thread that held a whole culture together across thousands of years none of them would live to see. Their children played with tiny useless spears and pretended, the exact same way children still do now with sticks and cardboard boxes and whatever else is lying around. None of this was written down as a plan. Nobody sat by a fire and decided to invent music or storytelling or art. It happened because the human brain, faced with empty time and nothing urgent to do, has never once in its entire existence been comfortable simply sitting still. That restlessness is not a modern personality flaw. It's ancient, it's universal, and it is very possibly the exact same itch that has you reaching for your phone right now. The tools changed. The urge never did.